this portion. Thank you, Ms. Reese. Thank you, Ms. Cleary, for this. We are going to move on to new business now. And the first thing we're going to talk about is social media policy. Who brought that up and who would like to discuss that under new business?
Mrs. Bradford, can I ask for a 5-minute recess?
We're going to move on. So please go ahead. If you need to
So
use the
we
restroom,
cannot- Yeah,
we're not going to take a break.
okay. That's amazing, yeah.
So would someone who brought up social media want
Yeah,
to
I
come?
brought it up
Okay.
and the reason for it, I think you've received multiple emails from board members. Mr. Nixon has received the emails. I think early this year, we got a memo from the attorney. And I just want clarity. We have a social media policy, which is very detailed, which is, I do have a printout of it. I just want to understand what is the purpose of having a social media policy specifically listing certain criteria and the concerns we raised with you, because I haven't received any responses back from Mrs. Bradford or you, Mr. Nixon.
Mr. Nixon, would you like to address that?
Sure, and I think I'd like Mr. Disler to weigh in on this as well. We had spoken about social media policy, and we spoke about social media policy in our policy committee as well, regarding what's the purpose of having a social media policy and how does it follow? And ultimately, I've asked, what are the options for a board president, a board member, or a superintendent in a situation where a board member brings up a concern about another board member possibly violating social media policy. So if you could speak to, for us, some of the things you shared with me regarding.
Sure. So I'll try to address kind of the start question. Then if anyone has any other questions for me, feel free. So social media uses by a board member is usually governed by the School Ethics Act, right? So some districts have a social media policy, some rely on the act. Typically, the boards that have such a policy do so because similar to a lot of your policies, right? The law controls, but you want a policy to kind of outline what that means for you as a district, right? And so it's very clear when there's an issue. Should we do something? Should we not? You have a policy that very clearly outlines it. Again, are you required to have this policy? You are not. It's just a matter of, does the board want said policy? So again, it can give board members guidance on how to proceed. Now, what is the avenue for violating that policy? It's not as if someone can call the superintendent and say, this board member is violating that policy, kick them off Facebook, right? That's not permitted. There's no act that your superintendent can take against an individual board member. They can't call the board attorney and say, this board member is acting unethically, do something about it. I promise you, I will not show up at your house and say, please stop doing that. Again, I can give guidance, but that's not my role. It's not your superintendent's role. Really, that's what the School Ethics Commission does. So why do you have a policy in place? It provides a little extra guidance. It sets kind of your values as a board. And usually a policy kind of goes into a little more detail in the School Ethics Act to try to explain to board members, look, this is what we think the act says, and this is what governs our conduct. Does that generally answer the question? Does anyone have more questions they would like to ask? I would ask not specifics, because that would be more of an executive session topic, but broadly speaking, I'm happy to kind of talk about it.
And we have asked NJSBA. They talked about it during the ethics training, social media. We've asked them to return to give us more in-depth training on social media. Mrs.
So-
Khanna?
I have a question just to essentially understand when anything is posted on social media as a board member, what is the responsibility or what is the limitation in terms of posting information that calls out impact on students, as an example?
Okay, so I'm going to get this. This is off the top of my head. So typically speaking, there are 4 requirements when you post something on social media. Number 1, you have to put a disclaimer, right? The school boards isn't here, but school boards, the School Ethics Commission will tell you that there is no specific language, but they also approve language in a footnote of a case. So if any board member has a question of what language would be good for me to put, I'm happy to share the footnote from that case as an example, because at least that we know is the School Ethics Commission has approved as appropriate language. So that's number 1. You have to have that disclaimer. Number 2, it's required to be accurate information. Number 3, it can't in any way, I think there's some provision like to the effect of harm staff members. And there is a 4th that I'm going blank on, but I'm happy to share it with the board via an email or the like. But that's typically our kind of the 4 when you're posting. Again, we talk about social media. A lot of this language, I'll be honest, comes from op-eds because it predates social media. But that's the general parameters when the board is discussing school-related matters. The idea behind it is they want to be very clear that you as a board member don't lose your rights as under the First Amendment. But then, of course, they then curb your rights under the First Amendment. I'll be honest, they say that like in every case, and oh, you have a board member, you have every right. But then again, here are the reasons that you can't say X, Y, and Z. But the most important, I think, is to be very clear to the public that I'm not doing this as a board member, right? Because there's that confusion that could exist. And certainly as an individual, you don't want to make sure, you want to be clear that you're not making this view representing the board. Because no individual can do so as an individual board member, albeit some exceptions here and there, but for the most part, specifically on social media, those are kind of the big hits. But I'm happy to email the board as well, further guidance with the footnote and the like. Yep.
So the disclaimer though, right? So we've had some discussion on this. The disclaimer doesn't really protect you if you violate the ethics, right? Like that's
Those upper 2
really,
prompts, yeah.
right. So, right, even our social media policy specifically talks about, right, like reinforcing the code of ethics, right? That commenting on anything that the board is currently doing, right, is unethical. And that all knowledge needs to be public knowledge when discussed in public, right? It should not be something that board members know, right, as board members, but something that has been discussed in a public meeting and the whole public has access to it.
Sorry, so I think what you're saying is, if, for example, you put the disclaimer, but reveal confidential information.
Confidential information, or you discuss a topic that is currently before the board, right? Even if you put the disclaimer, that doesn't really protect you, right? The disclaimer is just to allow the public the inside knowledge that you are a board member.
Correct. So you have to meet all 4 prongs. So
Right.
again, I think you might have hit the 4th one, no confidential information. Again, disclaimer, it can't compromise the board and it can't
How does this,
accurate and go against staff members, right? So
how does
those are-
this also apply to emails, right? Because we've also seen, right, like I might not post something on social media, but if I respond to a member of the public, right, I've seen that some of us have started to put like disclaimers on our emails, but if our emails break any of the code of ethics, right, like supporting board members, supporting staff, right, any of that kind of stuff, or not accurate or truthful, right, like all of that, the email, like we don't have a policy on email, but it's still the same ethics.
Yeah, again, I don't want to speak too broadly, right? Like,
Yeah.
if, for example, a board member emails a spouse complaining about a staff member, I don't think that would fall under the ethics. But
Right.
if they're emailing, a group of members of the public, certainly it's possible,
Yeah.
right? Again, School Ethics Commission is just that. It's a group of individuals similar to this board. And it tends to be very fact specific, I'll be honest with you. So it's hard for me to answer all these questions in a vacuum. Could I see a situation where an email is found to be a violation of the act? Sure. Could I see a situation where, do I think that every board member needs to put the disclaimer on all of their emails? I do not, right?
Right.
I think that's one step too far, but certainly, right? I don't think that just because it's an email can't be similar to social media if you're emailing in a listserv per se.
Right.
Again, I think we're going adrift here from the social media policy. It sounds like you have school boards coming in for ethics training. I would encourage you to have the questions and possibly email maybe those in advance because that's typically helpful, but certainly also I'm here to help guide. It's better to be proactive in these things. So if anyone has any questions in advance, I assume your policy probably says send this to the board president or superintendent, they can share just to help you get guidance. Because it is, there are a lot of landmines out there. I'll put it, it's not easy navigating this. I continue to remind people, both behind the scenes and in public, that you guys are all volunteers. And it's not an easy job, and the School Ethics Commission in many times does not make your job any easier. So we're here to help in any way we can.
Yeah. So like, let's say, right, the calendar gets approved by the board, right? And I want to post, the calendar has been approved by the board, here's the link, right? I don't need to put a disclaimer on that, right? Because that's public information that I'm sharing as a public.
So I don't want to go that, so that example is fine. I
Right.
think the next examples get tougher. So I don't want to go in like, yes, you can just do that. Because then we get into situations where people put like little comments, like go to here, things like that. So I guess in a nutshell, if you're just posting a link, you're probably fine. But then if you add a little, but it's very fact sensitive. And I do want to encourage, I want to avoid the very specific questions, right? That's what for your ethics training is. And I have found that when we do those, sometimes it can lead down a road that I don't think we want to go here tonight.
Understood.
So we'll go for more training from NJSBA on our social media. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Forger, you had a question?
Sort of, I think you were going down a list of 4 things and you couldn't remember the 4th one, but I think in the course of the discussion, it came out, it was the no disclosure of confidential
I
information.
think that might be right. Again, I'm going off the top of my head here from my last
Yeah.
ethics training that I did. But I'm happy to email out kind of the list we put together of like, here's how to safely do it.
And I just remember going to one of the sessions down at Atlantic City School Board's convention, and this whole social media area is a landmine. You got to be very careful. Even putting a disclaimer, I think sometimes they said, well, that wasn't really good enough. And then I said to myself, man, just stay off of this thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mrs. Bradford, I have a
Mrs.
follow-up.
Zakiri?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So when you say the posts have to be accurate and they cannot disclose confidential information that the public is not aware of, we have seen clear examples where some of the posts were like pay the teachers or giving specific number of students that were going to be impacted by some of the policy decisions this
Well,
board
let's
was
not go
taking.
into specifics because as Mr. Disler just said, he
Can I
cannot do that.
complete- Can I
So
complete my
let's
question?
just wait for the training and then we'll move on from there, put it back to the policy committee. So
Can I-
please don't mention anything that is specific to something that has been posted.
It's already out. Can I finish my question, Mrs. Bradford?
Be
Without
careful.
you- Yeah. It's already out there. It's
Be
posted.
careful what you are saying now in public in repeating something.
And that wasn't posted by me. So I get your warning. And if I don't get interrupted, I just want to say 4 points. There have been multiple instances this year with information that was only privy to the board on, and some of the information that was posted on there with the 10,000 plus forum, and Natasha can speak to it. We have given you specific examples with screenshots saying these many hundred students are getting impacted. On what basis? Where is the accuracy to that statement? There was no disclaimer put on the social media post. There was a vote that happened publicly.
May your second point then, please, Mrs. Zakiri. I
Yes.
don't want you to get into specific emails that have been posted
I'm not talking about emails. These are specific posts that
on
have,
posts.
yeah, so they're out there. You have seen the.
I do not want you to repeat it
Why not?
because I do not want anyone on this board to violate anything in ethics. We're going to have the training and then we will work.
We've all been trained and I
Yes,
have, and I'm.
Mrs.
and I'm
Zakiri,
fully-
I'm warning you a second time.
Yes, and I am fully aware with experience on ethics and ethics complaints to speak about it because this very board has used attorneys to even research on probable ethics complaints without any screenshots. So all I'm asking is, we have Mr. Disler here who said there are 4 points, confidential information and accurate statements. And a disclaimer is not necessary, but it has to be stated. So there are specific examples with screenshots of impact on students. How did this particular board member get the specific information on how many students are
Okay,
impacted?
we're going to end this conversation because I'm afraid we're getting into areas that might be an ethical violation.
I'm asking Mr. Disler for a clarification. Can we post or can any board member post without a disclaimer, without any specific accuracy on how they're getting this information? This information was only privy to the board.
Run that by me, sorry. Run that by me one more time.
So it should be accurate. One of the posts that she is discussing is my post on
Excuse me.
social media.
No, 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 Mrs.
Excuse
Bradford, the
me,
floor was
excuse
mine.
me,
So Mr.
excuse
Dickler
me.
and
All right. We are stopping this now. We are not going to continue this on social media. We're moving on.
Excuse
It
me,
is
point of
closed.
order,
We
Mrs.
are
No,
moving on now
point of
to
order.
increasing.
Point of
OPMA.
order, Mrs.
fine.
Bradford, you cannot
Mrs.
end.
Akiri.
Point of order.
Mrs.
We need-
Akiri,
There is a
we
new
are getting
business.
into accusations among
There
board
is no-
members and I am not going to allow
I
it.
was just clarifying. my
No, there's
question.
no need to clarify
How can you decide that? On what basis?
because,
We are ruled by
Thank
Robert's
you.
Rules of Order.
correct.
You need to
And
tell
we
me
are stopping
specifically
this conversation
on-
as new
on what
business.
grounds.
We are stopping this because it
You
is.
do not have that power, Mrs. Bradford. With all
Mrs.
due
Akiri,
respect,
I do. We're moving the business along.
Dipti, as Vice
Thank
President,
you.
I want you to
Excuse
chime in.
me, we're
No.
moving on to
On
new
what
business
basis can
number
you
2.
No, no, listen, Mr. Disler, who's a board paid
Correct.
attorney.
And he
yes.
cannot comment on something that was posted
you
by
the
one
one-
board member to another.
Yeah, I'm asking, he asked me to clarify my question and I'm clarifying my question. You cannot shut a board member down. This is on the record. You've done this discriminatory act every single time I open my mouth to speak.
That's not true. And we are
We
not
have-
going to
I-
go
when I-
ahead with
when I
this.
when I go to the State Department of Ed, with the documented evidence, you can defend yourself, Mrs. Bradford.
Thank
I'm
you,
going to
Mrs.
clarify
Akiri.
my question.
We are
with-
moving on.
I-
Number 2,
Mr.
new
Disler, Can
business.
this be shut down? Can this discussion be shut down?
But if she is talking about accusations, Mrs. Stanley,
It has
stop.
to be accurate information that he's
Stop.
actually being able to give to, right? And that is not accurate information. It's
Mr.
accusations,
Dissler,
which
can
is
you
why we
end
can't
this?
discuss it in public.
I'm gonna,
Arbiter of that accurate information right this minute. Let her.
It's my
finish
post.
the
I think I should be
question.
able to
So
speak
I
on it
wanna
if we're
just-
going to bring it up.
We were just instructed, we are not gonna do that.
so I
Please.
can't,
No.
I'm not gonna,
Then we're choosing which board member gets to speak.
Okay,
May-
Mrs.
may
Stanley,
I-
we're
may
going to
I-
ask for Mr. Dirk
of order.
Diffler's opinion.
so I'm just,
May I ask for just a 5-minute recess? to-
No,
No. not
so I
All
want to
right,
be,
how about a 10-minute recess?
No,
I wanna be very-
wait? No, no, why? can't we-
Mr.
let me-
Dissler has the floor.
I just want to be clear that ethically, I don't think it's appropriate for me to delve into specifics, right? So if you want to bring up the post, I can't, this isn't an appropriate form, right? I'm not the appropriate arbiter of that. I do want to clarify though, I do have my list here if that's, can I at least talk about? So I can share the disclaimer. So the 4 issues that I brought up, because I was going off the top of my head, but so you need to, again, identify yourself as a board member. Indicate that the post is not authorized by or written on behalf of the board, so that's the very clear disclaimer. Provide accurate information that is not confidential, and then ensure that your action does not compromise the board. I should these are when these issues are concerning the board. You do have every right to comment on whatever goes on in Trenton, even if it's related to schools as a whole. This is just, again, issues that might become before you as a board. I don't want to get into specifics, but if you have questions that won't touch upon that won't get me in trouble, I'm happy to.
Let Tom go
Unfortunately, you
first.
already went into specifics in your last discussion.
Mrs.
Yeah.
Khanna, you have something to add?
I think, let Tom go first and then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, I've seen this phrase, compromise the board. And I've always wondered, what exactly does that mean? What does
That's-
it mean to compromise the board?
That is a great question. I would love to give you I can give you, again, we can go through cases. That's more for what your training is. It's very, and I don't want to dodge this question because I think it is a fair one. And this is why this area is a landmine for board members, right? Because
Yeah.
you're sitting here, you're trying to give opinions on everything. And then you get, again, that question. That's just not for me. That's more, again, the best way to answer it, there are great examples and cases out there that you'll go through during your ethics training. Could I give you a specific definition? I cannot, because the School Ethics Commission has not given us anyone. It's similar to them. They take it as fact-based, which I wish, again, I can give you something clearer, but I can't.
So number 2, thank you. Increasing OPMA complement.
Sorry, I had one, hopefully the last follow-up here. What is the advice on somebody going on social media and commenting on a board vote? With no disclaimers, with putting their own words around the board vote.
But again, that is not accurate or clear information.
Mrs.
You are asking
Bradford,
for
at
a
this point,
general.
Can you?
At this point, I have already said, we have stopped this conversation.
No,
So
only
I'm not
Mr.
going
Dis-
to allow this to move on. We've had an opinion from the attorney. We will wait for the training from the NJSBA on this. Then we will move it to the policy committee.
No, can-
New business
so only-
number
no,
2.
So only Mr. So I want to ask
Increasing
Robert
OPA
point of order.
compliance,
Can the
Berkeley
president do
Heights
this?
Public Schools Committee meeting minutes documentation. Who brought this up and
I
who would like to
moved, I
discuss it?
moved to have a 5-minute recess, right?
No.
Can I get a second?
No, we are moving on. We have the public here waiting and it is 9:15. So number 2, increasing. Who brought this
Yeah,
up?
I will second the motion.
Who brought this up?
There is a motion on the floor, Mrs.
We are
Bradford,
not
for a
accepting your
recess.
motion because
We
you
are
never had the
not-
floor.
We are not recognizing the motion. We are moving on to new business at this time. We have the public here.
So basically, as board members, we are humans, right? And we have come here at 6:30. We're asking for a recess nicely.
If you
and
need
res-
to take a break, Mrs. Zakiri, you are free to leave at this time.
No,
and
I would like
come
Mr.
back.
Disler to know, I would like to know from Mr. Disler 2 points. Can a board member request for a recess to be put on vote? Then number 2, can a board president unilaterally and dictatorially shut down conversation and limit conversation? I want Mr. Disler to respond. Thank you.
It is a timely, the board president is to move the meeting along in a timely fashion. We are now in new business. We have exhausted what we've talked about for social media policy. We're moving on to number 2.
Gail, a point of order. I'm still waiting for an answer to my question.
What was your question?
It was inaccurate
My
information.
question,
So listen, if you
Pamela?
see
Mrs. Stanley,
Pamela,
Mrs.
you get to talk.
Stanley.
I get to talk. That's
Mrs.
only
Stanley,
fair.
stop.
you've had your turn. This is me
No,
asking
I
a
haven't
question.
had
Okay.
turn. That's the point.
This is what we have to avoid. We are
So my-
not being respectful. And I am again, for the 3rd time saying, we have stopped this conversation on number 1, social media. We are moving on to number 2.
I
Who brought up
asked Mr.
number
Disler-
2?
Okay, I asked Mr. Disler to answer. Can you do that? Can you shut down conversation unilaterally? Does the board president have the ability to do that?
So, I think there are 2 questions out there that I will, I guess, try to address. So I think the board president does have the right to continue to move the meeting forward, right? If discussion is kind of moving and not productive, I think the board member does have the right, board president does have the right to move forward. But I'll answer your second question. I do think there's a motion on the table for a 5-minute recess and seconded. So I do think that has to be voted on. So of those,
Even though it was during, even though it was during discussion, like it
This is during
brought
new
up-
business.
Yeah, like we're in new business. We haven't even gotten to public comment and she's just allowed to announce, right? Like when she doesn't even have the floor that she wants to.
I think she would have to get recognized. I agree with that,
Right,
but I do
She
think,
was never recognized, right? She was just talking.
again, you're asking me, do I think a board member, again, can ask to be recognized and make a motion for a short
Right, but she
recess?
wasn't recognized.
Sure,
It
but-
was my time. I was talking when I was
No.
speaking.
Again, I don't want to, I don't want to get debate. If you're asking my 2 opinions on it, I think a board president, again, in reasonable fashion can move me forward, but I do think a motion for a short recess can be
So
a second.
in a reasonable fashion, meaning when we asked a specific question, she allowed some board members' questions to you to be answered by you. And the moment some other board members ask, she shuts it down. That is discriminatory, okay?
Just
That is
answered
what
your
just,
question.
Okay,
so
are
my-
moving
There is
on
a
to
motion on
number
the
2.
floor. There's a motion on the floor, Mrs. Bradford, and
This is,
what.
is it, what is it called when it's a depilatory? What is that called? The dilatory
I
motion?
mean, in what respect? Sorry.
Not pertinent.
So, again, a non-relevant. If you're asking me, if you're asking my recommendation, I think you can move on to new business. I think number 1 is closed. Move on to number 2, and then if a motion again is made for a short
There
recess.
was a motion on the floor, Mr. Disler, when
Then I
I
think-
had a
Make
chance
a
to
motion
speak.
when you interrupt, right?
So
You
then
can't
again,
make
I
a
think
motion.
the speaker can be recognized, make a short motion for a recess. If that is seconded and voted on, then you move forward.
I would like to request to be recognized.
No. Moving on, increasing OPMA compliance with Berkeley Heights Public School NJ committee meetings documentation. Who brought this up and who would like to discuss it?
So I would like to be recognized. I brought this up. I move a motion for a 5-minute recess. Can I get a second?
Okay, roll call.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Curie,
Yes.
Dr. Forager,
Yes.
Mr. Hyman,
No.
Ms. Jolly,
Yes.
Ms. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanley,
No.
Ms. Bradford.
No.
Motion
5-minute
passes.
5-minute recess.